opposite wall if you need a restroom. Thank you.
Thanks, Grace. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Dr. Reitzman. I'm chair of the Department of Modern Languages and the founder and director of various speaker series on campus. As some of you know, I have run an LGBTQIA+ and a Latinx speaker series since 2011. And in 2018, we founded the Interdisciplinary Borders and Migrations Initiative, which has often combined with the other two speaker series. And although COVID interrupted our programming for one semester, we have continued to offer borders and migrations programming in multiple languages from a variety of perspectives as diverse as healthcare for detained migrant populations, Mexican perspectives on migration, Afghans and legal pathways to the US, and the refugee crisis on the borders of Poland and Hungary. And there's another crisis brewing, as you know, along those borders. You can find a variety of research tools, teaching materials, and other things of interest on the Borders and Migrations webpage. And if you want to find it, you just Google Canisius Borders, and it's the first thing that pops up. And I want to thank Mark Gallimore from Coley and my CEEP students, particularly Sarah Lynch here, who has cleaned that website up for us. And we also have, as a result, a lovely YouTube channel where you can find all of our events, including today's event, if you want to access those. It also lists our community partners, and contact information for those. For this event, I want to thank the Department of Modern Languages, Literatures and Cultures, Sociology, Political Science, and International Relations, Fine Art, Art History, Arts, Canisius. I never know, Yvonne, which one of those to. So all of them. And the VPAA's Office for Funding, as well as our alumni and community donors, the CEEP program, particularly Sarah Lynch, as I mentioned before, and Emma Radel, who made the posters, or some of the posters. Sarah made some of the other posters. The library for hosting us, and the PA program for their support for this semester's series of events. And I especially want to thank Gloria Wise, whose generous donation inspired the focus this semester on AAPI issues. So thank you, Gloria. Today's event marks the inauguration of the Diana and Simon L. Nobleza AAPI event series of Borders and Migrations in honor of Gloria's parents. So thank you, Gloria. As you can see from the flyer, the other events from this semester include a sociological study of anti-Asian discrimination in the shadow of COVID, a documentary film exploring the contrast between the free migration of red crabs on Christmas Island, where the government of Australia maintains a migrant detention center. The film is free and streaming, and you can access it with the QR codes that are on the flyer there. Again, thanks to the library for funding that for us. There will be then a speaker from that film who's featured in that film who will be joining us virtually. There's also an art installation called Diaspora on the Front Lines about Filipino healthcare workers that will be displayed, a cube in the library and 2 cubes in the Science Center during the month of April. And the series will conclude with a talk by the artist behind the photographic series. So I hope you'll join us in person or remotely for a variety of those events. It is my pleasure today to introduce to you Rakesh Satyal. Rakesh is the author of the novels Blue Boy and No One Can Pronounce My Name. Blue Boy was the winner of a Lambda Literary Award and the Prose Poetry Award from the Association of Asian American Studies. And No One Can Pronounce My Name was longlisted for the Dublin Literary Award. Satyal is an executive editor at HarperOne, a division of Harper Collins. Satyal's novels are deeply embedded in the exploration of Indian American identities, frequently within the context of exploring sexuality and sexual awakenings. His characters are lively, engaging, sometimes enraging, and utterly relatable in the humanity, their struggles, their loneliness, and their joys. I often found myself reflected in his characters, remembering and laughing at or slightly embarrassed by my own awkward search for self, reflected in the antics of Karen in Blue Boy, or the confusion of not belonging in the characters in No One Can Pronounce My Name. His novels are full of a bit of angst, longing, and loss, both of preteens and adults alike, but they're also very funny, hopeful, and joyous. He writes with a glorious richness, full of color, aromas, and endearing characters who are often awkward outsiders in search of love, understanding, happiness, and home. All universal themes we can identify with, even if we aren't lucky enough to be Indian American. Please welcome Rakesh Satyal.
that lovely introduction and for greater fashion sense than I possess. I too like to be an embodiment of angst, longing, and loss, so I appreciate that. Thank you to all of you for being here and all of you online as well. I should note, I'm going to read for a bit, then speak for a bit, and then we're going to have a Q&A at the end. So either people here in the room or those of you on Zoom who want to submit questions in the chat, please do so. So I'm going to read something I haven't done in quite some time. I'm going to read from the beginning of Blue Boy, my first novel, which came out in 2009. Oh gosh. And so I'm going to read from the very beginning of that book. Prologue, Make Up Believe. I'm surprised that my mother still doesn't know. Surely she must notice her cosmetics diminishing every day. Surely she has noticed that the ends of her lipsticks are rounded, their pointy tips dulled by frequent application to my tiny but full mouth. Surely she has noticed that her eyeshadows have been rubbed to the core, a silver eye looking back at her from the bottom of each case. But here she is again, cooking obliviously in the kitchen, adding fire-colored turmeric to the boiling basmati rice and humming her husky alto. I've got homework, I tell her as I pad across the linoleum floor and head for the foyer. I'm in Umbro shorts and a white t-shirt, the standard lazy boy uniform in these parts, and my legs are tired from running barefoot in our backyard. Watch your feet, she says, pointing a powdered finger at the faint grass streaks my soles are leaving on the floor. I scurry away as I have learned in ballet class, as if grace is an able antidote to dirt. Kiran beta, your dad. That's all it takes. I stop on the tiled floor of the foyer, open the front door, and step onto the front porch. The smooth cement feels nice under my feet, especially since it is a hot, humid Cincinnati day. I walk the red brick contour of our house to the nearest spout and struggle to twist the water on. Once I have succeeded, I scrub each sole clean with my hand. As I stand back on the cement, my feet feel icy. In comparison, the rest of my body feels hot and sticky. I wipe my feet on the doormat and go back inside, back into the AC and the sound of my mother's metal ladle stirring lentils. Homework, I call out and start up the carpeted stairs. Our staircase splits in two, so that to the left, one set of stairs leads to my bedroom and the guest room, and to the right, another leads to the master bedroom. My father is out playing tennis with a family friend. My mother is singing bhajans as she stirs the dal. The master bathroom is all mine. Involuntarily, I sputter the theme from Mission Impossible. This mission is far from impossible. I've succeeded at it time and again, so that the only impossible mission seems to be not wanting to put on makeup. The master bathroom is regal in size and stature, a vaulted skylight above, two sparkling brass faucets popping out from the white marble counter. There is whiteness everywhere, shining at me from the tub of the jacuzzi, from the white tiled floor, from the tall white walls. The only conflict of color comes from the bright orange towel that my father keeps near the faucets. He uses it after each time he washes, not to dry his hands, but to dry the faucets. You must always wipe them clean or the sink will be in trouble, he said once, referring to the tarnish that he fears the way a hemophiliac must fear thorns. A wash in this white made all the brighter due to the skylight. I set to work. I open my mother's cosmetics drawer and pull out her squat silver makeup case. It makes a high tink as I set it on the counter. I roll the drawer shut. It rumbles and thuds. This sound reminds me of my mother's rolling pin, pushing balls of dough into roti, and I venture a listen against the bathroom door to make sure she is still cooking. There's the ladle once more, tapping against the stainless steel pot. There are so many lipstick colors to choose from that one would think my mother were a model. The names are almost as exciting as the hues: Fire Engine, Mulberry, Fanfare. I love Fire Engine the most. It looks like the kind of lipstick Cindy Crawford wears in Sports Illustrated. And it is a nice compliment to my brown skin. But wait, I think I like Mulberry more. It's dark and mysterious, like me. I push it over my lips, over Fire Engine, the two colors mixing into a murky paste. Oops, I say, the word echoing. I pull a streamer of toilet paper from the dispenser and wipe the goo off, my eyes settling on Fanfare. A Fanfare indeed is almost orange on my lips. Too orange, more toilet paper. Magenta. My mom has a bright magenta Salvar kameez that she wears with this lipstick. The front of the Salvar kameez is covered in gold embroidery. Once, when my mom was out, I put on this lipstick and then put on that Salvar kameez and started crying. I don't know why. Since then, I have not put on magenta. But something about today, my feet still cold, my torso still hot, the faint strains of my mom trying on some soprano downstairs makes me want to try on magenta again. I apply it intently, coloring in my lips as I would a picture, and my mouth transforms into a smudge of passion. I once asked my mom what they call eyeliner in Hindi. Kajol. I don't even call it eyeliner anymore. Eyeliner is all well and good. It conjures up Maybelline commercials, girls with lashes as fat as ants. But kajol is a whole other can of worms. Cleopatra would not have worn eyeliner. Cleopatra would have worn kajol. Nefertiti would have worn kajol. Even King Tut would have worn it. I am the king of excess. Here in my regal bathroom, I put on makeup too thickly, and I like it that way. I like the thickness on my lashes, the lipstick balled in tissue. I dipped my pinky into the tub of mascara and coated in black, and then I smeared around my eye, consider spreading 3 long black lines out of it. But I don't. I don't because I have become entranced by my own eyes in the mirror, how powerful they look when encased in black. The thud of the ladle once more, punctuated by ardent rolling. The dusting of Durham flour my mother sprinkles on the roti must be as delicate as the blush with which I am decorating my cheeks. It is very pink, baby pink. My cheekbones are high, and as I apply the blush, I aim for a sweeping effect, brushing up and over each bone. I flick the brush with melodramatic polish, but in the process, I sweep a few choice flecks into my black bordered eye. I scream, silently, knowing that even the semblance of a whimper will reach my mother's worrywart ears. I can see it now, me letting out a grace note of pain and the loud rolling pin suddenly stopping, my mother conscious of the sound that flour particles are making as they hit the counter, the flapping of a ladybug's wings, the biorhythm of my father from miles away thumping in her ears, and then me, impaled by my pencil as I studied, electrocuted by my calculator, abducted by local yokels. Even though my mother has come to the Midwest from the most exotic and dangerous of lands, Ohio can scare the hell out of her. India may be full of man-eating tigers, but Ohio is full of Ohioans. One whimper from me is enough to make her die of fright, or make her come sprinting up the stairs, rolling pin still in hand like she's a Beverly Hillbilly, ready to attack whatever it is that attacks me. Sometimes I shudder thinking just what she would do if she stumbled in, expecting a kidnapping and instead finding me in her best Estee Lauder. I turn on the faucet and flick a few drops of water in my eye to flush out the Rogue Rouge. This proves to be a big mistake. My dear Kajal has followed the blush's lead and head straight into my eye. My silent scream has turned into a silent caterwaul. I hop around in pain, trying again to use Grand Jeté to alleviate my problems. I go back to the faucet and try to flush the rouge out. This time it seems to work. The pain lessens and I am left with a half bloodshot eye, a mess of black and pink oozing from it. At least my lips still look fabulous. Good old magenta. Kiddin, my mom calls, come help me with the roti. I almost respond, but realize my mother expects my voice to come from the other end of the house, not from the master bedroom. She is used to me not coming when she calls the first time anyway, so I continue with the matter at hand. I pick up the bunched tissue again and wipe the mess out from under my eye. I step back to the makeup with more fervor than ever before, making myself a real work of art. I'm entranced by the eyes in the mirror once again, entranced by their penetrating stare, how strong yet delicate they look. I choose the bluest eyeshadow that I can find and cover each of my lids in 4 coats. The girl in the mirror has grown so beautiful. She puckers her lips, winks, applies another layer of her magenta lipstick. I don't spend much time looking at her. It is the simple fact that she has reached the peak of her beauty that satisfies me. And so, after a few turns, a few more balletic moves, free of technique but choreographed instead by my joy, I begin to clean up. My mother may be used to me not coming on the first call, but the second call means business. In a few minutes, she will let out that second call, and even the thought of the homework she thinks I've been doing all this time won't compensate for my lack of punctuality. I kiss the magenta and then sheathe her, place her lovingly in the silver case. Fire Engine and Mulberry are frumpy, as if berating me for having left them in the pink dust. Sorry, I say, stabbing the brush of the kajal back in her cap and placing her in the drawer as well. I pick up the eyeshadow as if to put it back, but before parting with it, I dip my pinky in, turning the tip of my finger blue. An idea, a light bulb, throbs on blue in my head. I smear more blue over my lids, and then doing what I wanted to do before, I begin to make my harlequin lashes, except now they are baby blue, and they are gorgeous. Stunning, I whisper to the mirror girl, doing my best Joan Rivers impression. The girl giggles, and when she bats her lashes, they look like enormous blue feathers. There's something about the contrast of the blue against the magenta, the way that the brown of my skin disappears under the blue marking that I find irresistible, that moves my hand as if by magic across the contour of my face, down my thin nose, across my wide, smooth forehead. It makes me wonder why women don't make their faces blue instead of tan or brown or whatever their boring compacts offer them. There is something to be said for creating a natural looking face, but there is also something to be said for standing out, entrancing, glowing. As my pinky makes its last curve under my chin, I am breathless. Each stroke has moved the energy in the bathroom from this side of the mirror to the other, so that the magenta and black siren over there, bruised blue, seems the only presence in here. And then a knock on the door. Kiran, what are you doing in there? There is powder all over the counter. The tissues are still bunched up in the sink. There's the unmistakable smell of makeup in the air, perfumed and gritty. The sun from the vaulted ceiling falls around me in one focused circle, a spotlight, as if I'm Harrison Ford in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Kiran, open this door. I'm peeing, Mom, I say, and twist the faucet slightly to mimic the sound of tinkling urine. But in my anxiety, I twist a little too hard, and only if my penis were in fact a fjord would it be capable of making the watery racket that ensues. Kiran, mar kya? I cringe at this utterance, the precursor to a mother's ginger but firm slap across the face. You're going to get it. I wipe the powder off the counter into my hand, then wash it into the sink. I grab the tissues and throw them into the garbage basket, then realize they're still visible and incriminating. So like a true felon, I grab them back and throw them into the toilet. I flush, calling out, just a second, just finished peeing. The tissue's gone, I feel a wash of relief, and I head to the door. I unlock it, but just before opening it, I realize the makeup, it's still on my face. Kiran entered this room and Mirror Girl is leaving it. I grasp to relock the door, but it is already opening. There's my Beverly Hillbilly mom, rolling pin in her right hand, ladle in her left, and shot on her face. Arre, she puffs that indistinct Indian noise, a mixture of wonder and nonplussed horror. I have no idea what to say. It is as if I'm in my mother's place, watching myself as I've been doing these past few minutes. My blue glows somebody else, a girl in a mirror. But no, there is no mistaking. I am on this side of the doorway, sputtering to provide an explanation. Out of desperation, I look past my mother's shoulder to the small altar of deities she has arranged on the bookshelf near the bed. A bright portrait of Vishnu, gold encircling the tips of his many fingers like rings around a planet. An icon of Lakshmi, red and magenta on her lush lotus flower. Shiva, eyelids drooping, Cobra beaming from his shoulder like Blackbeard's parrot. And then there's Krishna, blue-skinned and smiling secretly into his silver flute, his peacock feather headdress more crown-like than Lakshmi's shining helmet. In this split second, I pray to him to help me, and then I have a genius idea. Kiran, what is going on, my mother says, gesticulating with one hand and sending a poof of flour into the air. With every second that I don't speak, the worry on her face grows. Oddly, she seems younger, not older, as if reduced to a child. After all, confusion is a childish feeling. I know in this moment that, more than anything else, I am confused. Confused enough to say, surprise. What? My mother says. Surprise, Mom, guess who I am? It is the perfect thing to say at the moment. Who knows who the hell I am? My mother shakes her head, not sure what to say. Mom, I'm Krishna, I say, I'm Krishna Ji. I style my hands next to my mouth, miming a flute and trying very hard to smile gracefully. Relief would be an understatement. My mother drops her rolling pin and ladle on the pink carpet and hugs me tightly, paying no attention to the makeup she is getting all over herself in the process. A string of Hindi prayers issues from her mouth, along with a sigh of pure thankfulness that can only be described as the sound a fire hose makes while swishing out an inferno. Over my mom's shoulder, Krishna watches, and I swear I see him wink one full lash at me. And then, as my mother begins coughing for my stay, the blue light bulb in my head pulses, a thought exploding it into shards. What if I am Krishna? So, that is the very beginning of that book. So I'll talk a little bit about the origins of this book and talk a bit about the book I wrote after this. And there's kind of a through line between both of them. So I actually, like many people, took creative writing classes as an undergrad in college. And I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, not far from here, actually. And I think like many people who are creative from a young age, I loved writing and painting and doing a lot of visual art and performing and different things, but I always felt minimized in those activities and those pursuits because I think culturally that happens regardless. But I think, when you come from an Eastern background or an Indian background, those things can also sometimes be minimalized even farther. So I never really considered them as a serious pursuit or profession. But I took those classes in college and felt very encouraged by them. And actually my thesis in college was basically 3/4 of a novel that I was writing. So I felt a bit more affirmed in what I was pursuing. And so when I first moved to New York, and I started my first job working in book publishing, which is what I do now, I got really busy working, and I happened to be having dinner with a college professor, a mentor of mine who taught writing. And he asked if I was working on anything. And I said, I got really busy with work. I haven't really been, this is about a year after I moved to the city. And he said, no, you have to keep at it. It's a discipline, and you have to find the time to write if you want to do it. So this was in, I think maybe the fall of 2003 then, that's how long ago it was. I had this idea, I was thinking a lot about what I wanted my voice to be as a writer and what were the things that were really important to me. And I was, living in New York, my first professional job. I was finally out and kind of, living my young, professional life. And I thought, I want to write a story that engages with these topics, engages with identity and self-exploration and sexuality and culture clash. And I think I felt a real call to put whatever feelings I was feeling in the work itself. And this is something I say often to writers when I'm speaking to them or when I'm talking to authors, even of my own, which is, I think, again, because of that larger cultural diminishment we have of creative pursuits, oftentimes we feel hesitant to even state what we're trying to accomplish in the work and to really aim for those higher themes, those larger themes that really matter to us. So I think sometimes there can be a hesitancy to say, I am really trying to tackle these larger topics. I'm going to put them in the book. We might sort of gingerly explore things and begin at the sort of base level of storytelling and try to get some of the particulars on the page without really thinking, what are the larger things that I'm trying to tackle? What are the identities I'm trying to claim? And that's really served me later, because I realized even just rereading this prologue after so much time, that I really was showing a sort of level of intent as a writer in terms of what I was going to write about. And it's all those topics I just mentioned. And they're rooted in a character that I really tried to create, really imbue with a lot of humanity, that I really wanted to have a sense of humor with. That was very important to me, to kind of bring that sense of humor to the work. So I wrote this first scene probably in the span of maybe about half an hour when I was sitting one day, because I let these kind of thoughts stew for a bit in my mind. And then I thought, okay, I have to get this down on paper or on my computer. And it was helpful that my writing teacher had said that to me, because again, these ideas were kicking around in my head. But the important thing to remember is that, you can theorize about what you want to be writing, and you can wait for the muse to strike you. And there are muses that come to you. But the truth is, unless you sit down and do the work, none of that actually gets done. None of those ideas actually get out of you and onto into your computer or down on the page. And so it was very important to me to have that watershed moment where I sat down and wrote that prologue and got a sense of how I wanted things to unfurl. So what I would do then is, again, because I had a 9-to-5 job, or longer than 9-to-5 job, and I still work in that industry, I had to figure out, per my teacher's advice, when I was going to get this done. And so I often say to writers too, there's this old adage that you should write every day, and that, the old models that you write 1,000 words a day, and that's, roughly 3.5 pages, Times New Roman, double spaced in Word. And that works for a lot of people. I think that's a really good schedule for people to have, is having that regimen, having something consistent to do. I found over time that was not really as possible for me, because I would have to get up very early in the morning, which I'm not a morning person necessarily. And also I was working in an industry in publishing where the same part of my brain was kind of taken up with the same things I was exploring in writing. So what I figured out was what was convenient for me and what worked for me as a writer was that I would go every weekend. At the time, I lived on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And at that time, there was a coffee shop called DTUT, Downtown Uptown. That was actually the basis for Central Perk and Friends. It looked like that coffee shop. It wasn't as wide as that coffee shop in a set, but it was long. And it had the same kind of decor, the long rugs and the curtains and the chairs everywhere. And I would take my, at that time, Dell laptop that probably weighed about 15 pounds. And I would, lug it with the cord and everything down to this place 10 blocks from my apartment. And I would sit in the same chair. And I was lucky enough to find a plug, and I would sit and I'd work there on Saturdays and Sundays and try to get this done. So obviously that wasn't as productive as writing every day, and it took me a few years to actually get a first draft done. But again, it was that conviction of what I was trying to accomplish that really carried me through that process. And many writers will say this, but we're oftentimes trying to write the books that we wanted as kids that we didn't have. And for me, it was very important to write a story about a young, kind of questioning, curious, queer Indian child growing up in similar circumstances to mine, knowing that, when I was a very voracious reader as a child. I read all the time. I was in libraries all the time. And I hadn't yet read a character like this who spoke to me. And it's one of those things where you just realize, okay, if it doesn't exist already, why am I waiting? Why don't I be the person to actually do this? Why don't I sit down and write these things that I'm wondering about? And that leads a lot of the writing that I was doing in this book. I was recreating scenes of Indian families gathering and parties that would happen and what the kids might be thinking versus what the parents were thinking. And these various ideas, again, of culture clash and the cultural identities that might have been at odds with each other. So I was very conscious of that as I was working on the book and as things shaped up. And I really realized that, again, that sense of humor was going to be very central to what I was exploring. Because to me, one of the key things I was trying to accomplish in this book in particular was to show that, again, that children are capable of much more complex thinking than we think they're capable of. And I think not to make it too, make too easy a corollary to the contemporary times, but you can look at now what's happening about discussions about trans identity in our country in particular, and this idea of contending with whether or not children understand enough of the world to understand their own identities. And obviously, what I was exploring then a while ago is that children are very wise. They are very perceptive about what's happening in the world around them, and I didn't want to shy away from these ideas and how they see themselves, how they what they identify with and how they're coming into their own and the conviction they have about their sense of self. So those were things I was very, very attuned to exploring in the work. And I also wanted to bring this element in of the kind of religious aspect of it, not in a purely religious way, but to show how iconography and language around religion and those various things might either be helpful or not necessarily a hindrance, but might not have a space for the way the character might be thinking, where that character may find that space over time. So that was definitely something that was very key to me as I was writing it. And the wonderful thing about publishing this book then eventually was because I'd approached it in the spirit of, again, creating something that I wanted to see in the world and trying to create a dialogue around that character. I saw that very dialogue happen then in person once people in my Indian community in which I'd grown up started reading the book and talking about it. And we were actually just having this conversation yesterday about the idea that, once you put it out in the world, then people may engage with the work in a way that you didn't necessarily even envision, but then you have these kind of productive discussions that you never even fathomed you would have, because obviously there was a certain level of trepidation I had about publishing this book, wondering what my community might think of it, wondering what other Indian people would think, what my parents would think, what my family would think. And thankfully, there were kind of two things that emerged from that. First of all, they were very accepting and very curious about what I had written. But the second thing was this lesson I kind of learned that I'd forgotten or maybe sort of minimized away the idea that being immigrants themselves, they had a much higher level of understanding about things that were different from them than I might have given them credit for at the beginning. Like they had been through one of the greatest evolutions and changes people can go through, which is literally moving to the other side of the world. So the idea that I was sort of bifurcating those things in my mind and thinking they come from a more conservative culture, they won't necessarily understand this, that was not necessarily true. Now, it's not to say that people don't struggle with those things or that coming out is a simple process in any way, but it was very instructive to say, okay, by writing this and maybe showing a bit more of my own personal experience, they are now receiving that in the same spirit that they may have received the process of coming to a new country, about meeting people who were different from they were, and about kind of bridging that difference between the two cultures. So that was very instructive as well to go through that process. So thankfully, they were very supportive and affirmative about that. And then readers very much were, and I was very glad to kind of be able to go out in the world and to see people who, even if they hadn't grown up Indian American or who didn't identify as queer or LGBTQIA+ or anything like that, that the sense of difference or being alienated or feeling outside others was a very universal feeling. So that was really lovely. So obviously, so after that experience, I enjoyed working on the book and doing all that. Then of course you have everything set in Niveau code. What the hell am I going to do next? So that was its own kind of challenge. And there's a section, there's a kind of question and answer at the back of my second book, no one pronounced my name, this one, about kind of how I began writing that book from a kind of dark place. And I guess part of that was in the form of the fact that, again, being this kind of sophomore slump of what am I going to write? But at that point, I started working on that book around 2010. And I began writing it at the very beginning of the book begins with a character named Harit, who is a middle-aged Indian man who lives with his mother and is very, very lonely. And going back to what I mentioned earlier about what I was exploring in Blue Boy, these same themes of, again, identity, feeling outside of, a culture assimilation or difference with people, sexuality, and again, identity and orientation, all these things were still present in my thinking when I was working on that book. And again, it goes back to that topic that I love to talk to writers and authors about, which is there are going to be some truisms in the work that you do. There are going to be some themes that recur. And the question, and that's a kind of a statement of self that you're making, or a thesis statement of sorts about what you're trying to accomplish artistically. So when I was working on that book, I began with this character who was very, very loosely based on somebody I barely knew, actually. Years ago when I was in high school, I met the friend of a family friend who was similarly middle-aged, very quiet, unmarried, lived with his mother. And I remember realizing that the way people were talking about him, they just assumed that he was gay because he was unmarried and of a certain age. And I remember being very sad about that, not because he might have been gay, but because people were making assumptions about him that might not necessarily have been true. And I really kind of fixated on this person and on what his life might have been. And as I was thinking about where I was in my personal journey and feeling kind of lonely myself and feeling kind of alone, I thought, okay, maybe this is a character I should be exploring because maybe there's a middle ground that we share that will be very helpful and as I piece this story together. So I started writing about him, and it was just, I thought it might be a short story. I thought it might just be a character study or something I did as an exercise, but I really kind of became more and more obsessed with this character I was writing. But at the same time, I kind of started writing something else that I thought might be another short story, which was about another character who was a middle-aged woman who was sort of feeling alone in her marriage and who was very creative herself, who wrote basically paranormal romances in secret. So she was obsessed with vampires and werewolves and witches and all these things. And I started writing about her, and then it came to me after a while that actually this book was going to be about both of those people. And it was going to be about one of the things I kept returning to when I was feeling alone, which was friendship. So the idea that, at that point in time, I'd been single for a decade in my adult life, and I was feeling kind of at sea, and quite literally because in the middle of that process, I moved from New York to San Francisco for a new job. And I was in a new city. I had a handful of friends that I really trusted and felt comfortable with, but I was in this new place, in a new job, in a new industry, and feeling really much kind of not knowing what was. Actually, it was 10 years ago now. I actually moved to San Francisco in March 1st of 2012. So tomorrow will be a decade since then. But I really found solace in writing about these two people and about what they might find in each other, and the fact that in friendship, in understanding, in meeting somebody from outside your experience and finding common ground, that would be something that would restore both of them to themselves or their senses of self. So that was something I really started piecing together. And I actually wrote a piece about this in Literary Hub, LitHub, really popular site, about this experience of this almost symbiotic relationship I had with this character that I was writing, because something about the catharsis of exploring that character and going to actual therapy, not just writing, but doing both of them in tandem, I think opened up my own mind creatively and then my own life in a certain way. And lo and behold, I moved to San Francisco in March of that year, and by July of that year, I met my now husband. And I think that there was some emotional space I had created by creating that character that actually helped me through that process, that really put me in the mind space of actually understanding what it was that was really important in my work, and then what was just important as in my life as a person living in the world and trying to make my way in the world. So, so again, I worked on that book for a few years as well. And it was helpful, again, to see the reaction from people, to see a kind of evolution in the books, because the first book was written in a first person voice, and it's about this character who's 12 the entire time. And then I had these characters, it was a kind of larger cast of characters in the second book. And the two main characters were middle-aged, and they were, they had various circles around them. And just again, seeing how people could draw a through line between the themes I was exploring in the first book and the kind of, other ways it branched out in the second book. And now as a writer myself, now that I've done it twice, I'm trying to finish something new, those things haven't gone away. Those truths I was exploring at the very beginning when I started writing, those things that I really wanted to identify, they're still very present in my work. And I think the challenge is, how are you going to change? How are you going to evolve? How are you going to look at different facets of those perspectives? How are you going to deepen some of those meanings? And how are you going to find stories that haven't been told? And so that's the constant kind of goal and challenge I think I have is, what things haven't I explored? What books exist in the world or don't exist in the world? And it's the same exercise I did all that time ago. What is not out there in the world that I feel needs to be told that I myself want to be telling as well? So that's a bit about kind of me and my writing journey and the 2 books that I've published so far. But again, I'm happy to answer questions. I know we might have a few teed up already, but any others that people have both here and online, I'm happy to answer them. Yes.
Well, thank you for coming, Mr. Satyal. My name is Patrick. I'm curious about whether you had immediate success finding a publisher, because obviously your work was intentionally out of the mainstream and you work at a publishing company. Did you use that publisher? Did you go to a different publisher? Did you have immediate success with that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And just in case people didn't hear it on the recording, it's the question about finding a publisher and the experience of getting published, being a queer author, being an author from a marginalized background, what that might have been like. It's a very good question, and I often say to people, regardless, I do and did work in book publishing, and regardless of whether or not you have those connections, it's always very important to go through the process of getting published professionally and in a certain way, regardless of whether or not you have inroads to it, because I think every author needs to follow a certain professional path of how they do it. So for example, even though I worked in book publishing, I was very I kept those worlds very separate, where it wasn't like I was going around the office showing people what I was working on, because I wanted to be very mindful of the fact that I had a job and it was not about what I was writing. But I felt all the more reason why I should go through the process of, for example, querying book agents, literary agents about what I might work on, and again, keeping those worlds separate and querying them just the way I would if I didn't know anything about publishing and didn't work within it. And to be fair, there were probably a few agents I contacted before I landed on the one with whom I worked at that time. So it was again, a process that wouldn't happen with anybody else. And to be perfectly honest, I've said this before too, even though I worked in publishing and even though I had those connections, it was difficult to publish this first book because of the very reasons that you mentioned, because I got a lot of, it's queer and it's Indian, so it's less than, there are 2 marginalized communities you're bringing together. And of course, the case I was trying to make was that, no, that's more, the idea that the more identities you bring into it and the more marginalized they might be, the more reason there is to publish them. And I keep the same dogma in my life as an editor and as a publisher as well. The idea that I don't want to just look for people who are publishing exactly what's happening elsewhere. And if your first instinct is to say that there may not be an audience there, you have to question that. You actually have to stand back and ask yourself, why do I think that? And if I think that, are there certain blinders I have onto that? And if it hasn't been published before, then what are the affirmative reasons for why it should happen? So, I've told this story before, and not to belabor it, but I knew from a friend who had firsthand knowledge that one of the discussions happening when this first book was on submission to publishers from a kind of well-known publisher was something. Now this would have been in 2007, I think. Was a publisher who said, "Oh, the Indian thing is over," and I thought, for a variety of reasons, that was a problem. And I should note, around the same time this book came out, Slumdog Millionaire won Best Picture, and I was like, "Well, see, there's no Indian thing that's over now." But it was just, that was such a reductive thing to say or dismissive thing to say. So I think there were challenges that I ran into, but again, you have to keep your sense of self as a writer. And it's very important to be true to your own voice and to try to get the message out there that you want. And I think what's helpful is when you feel those challenges to find a sense of community, to find other writers who share those beliefs with you, who want to be creative in the same way. And then, and the wonderful thing is because of the internet, because of, online journals and everything, there are more eyes on people's work and there's more attention to people who come from those communities. And so there's more of a chance to try to experiment and try things and have people who will pay attention and read them. Yes.
Thank you for being here again. You mentioned that humor was something you wanted to use in your first book. And I wonder, were you wanting to use humor because of the content of the book, or is that more of just your personality and that's what you're doing across?
Good question. The question is about humor and kind of why I wanted to find, why I found a purpose for that in my work, and if that was motivated by my own personality or if there was just something creatively in the book that I was trying to accomplish. And the answer is both. I mean, I think generally, one of the things I was really trying to explore in that first, well, actually both books, is the sense of resilience people have, the idea that they find challenges, and oftentimes humor is the thing that provides that resilience to them, even when they're facing very, very difficult things. And I think that's a truism of life anyway, but I think that was that was from personal experience what I had been through, but also humor is this mitigating factor. You know, the idea that when things are very difficult, there's a way to deflect, diffuse some of that tension by having humor be part of it. And I think one of, the funny thing is actually kind of in shop talk, is this second book, no one can pronounce my name. The working title for a long time I had for it was just a sense of humor. Because one of the things thematically I was trying to accomplish was that a lot of literature, immigrant literature, and a lot of Indian American literature in particular, not that this was a bad thing, but a lot of it could be very heavy and using tragedy or grief as the main kind of iron in the fire narrative wise. And what I wanted to do that very consciously was to kind of subvert a grief narrative. The main character actually is in the grieving process at the beginning of the book. And I wanted to show how there are moments of levity that are really important and that actually carry us through, and that it's not just, just land, like the more serious thing is not the true north of the book, it's actually the joy people might feel. So that was very, very conscious, that effort on my part. And I think, it's a very, very pertinent question, because the thing I've been working on now takes place under very serious circumstances too. And I began writing it in a very, very kind of somber tone. And that didn't go away entirely, but I realized, okay, that goes back to that question, who am I as a writer? And what kind of books do I want to be writing? What kind of narratives do I want to be telling? And there's a way to accomplish both. And I don't want to lose my identity as a writer by just assuming, again, tacking to the thing that's more serious because that has more gravitas or is more important, quote unquote. But in fact, those things can coexist in it. And in fact, maybe I should be leading with humor again to sort of mitigate some of those factors as well. Sorry, I think there was a question.
Oh, actually, I was going to ask his question.
Oh, yes.
But,
Yeah.
but is Blue Boy autobiographical?
So yeah, the question is if Blue Boy is autobiographical. It's semi-autobiographical. I mean, I think that's one thing that working in publishing helped me, was that having worked with writers, I could see the things that I should probably change that I shouldn't keep the same. So I would say that there are things that are very true about the book, sort of in my own personal identity, but in terms of the scope of the book itself, it's very different from my own experience. And I guess that's where the writer part comes in, where you imagine the circumstances of what might happen. And again, there's this intersection that happens between the themes and sort of plot points you want to accomplish and then what actually happened, and you find that sort of happy medium between the two. But this is very true of first novels often, and often coming of age stories or books written in the first person, that oftentimes when it's the writer's first book, there's a statement of purpose being made, and they often draw from their own experience to do that work. So that's very true, but again, in coming of age narratives, that's often very true as well.
Sarah, I think there's a question online, right?
Just thank you for doing this.
Okay, oh, great, gratitude. That's always great. Well, any other last questions before we wrap up?
Actually, I have a
Yes,
question.
yes.
This other question.
Yeah.
So in both of your novels, food is a central sort of persona
Yeah.
in there. And it reminds me of other sort of immigrant or children of immigrant narratives. Like I think of Christina Garcia's Dreaming in Cuban,
Yep.
or Esmeralda Santiago, When I Was Puerto Rican. It's all about this, the smells of things that
Yeah.
trigger memories, but also the food themselves. I just wondered what your relationship is to food and how food plays in your novels.
Right, so the question is about food, which is my favorite question. Actually, my favorite and least favorite question, because I eat too much. I was saying actually last night when we went out to dinner that I always tell people when they ask if I have any dietary restrictions that I unfortunately eat everything. But yeah, I think food is a kind of great narrative device. It's something that's evocative, and as you say, it has sensory details to it that help place people within a narrative. But again, yeah, there's commentary about cultures that come together and people who do or don't understand things. And it's a it's where so much of our sensory lives are. And so that experience of what you want to be doing as writers, immersing people in the scene, or immersing them in what the characters are feeling. And oftentimes we do that through food. And I think But also, it's a very simple answer to yes. I just love food so much. It's like the more I can put it in the book, the better. But I think, you'll see this. The examples you cite are perfect, where oftentimes you will see this in immigrant literature because of culture often asserts its presence by way of its food and by the communal aspect of it. And actually very much in both books, especially in Blue Boy, there are two very key scenes in that book that happen at a kind of Indian party. And the food is very central to that because you're seeing there's almost a utilitarian aspect to it, getting everybody fed, but the ways by which that occurs is very telling of the various people who are involved. So the kids, for example, are very, very, they really just want pizza, because they're just used to that Western thing. And the Indian parents are almost trying to foist Indian food on them in those public settings, but the kids aren't having any of it. So some of that becomes very helpful from, again, just a character driven choice and then a plot driven choice as well. Yes.
Leon, you mentioned being a voracious reader but not finding relatable characters. And so it caused me to ask what your favorite authors now, what you're reading, favorite books.
Good question. Yeah. The question is because of my own trying to find characters and narrators and protagonists that I want in libraries as a kid in particular. Who are some of the people I love reading now? It's there's so many people I could name because I read so much for work as well. I'm trying to think of there's I really love the work of the poet and prose writer Saeed Jones, who actually lives in Columbus now, who has written 2 books of poetry collection, Prelude to Peruse, and a really fantastic memoir called How We Fight for Our Lives. And he has actually a new poetry collection called, I think, Alive at the End of the World that's coming out this year, but he's really, really a phenomenal writer. Like many queer people, I'm a big fan of the writer Garth Greenwell, who is very lyrical and beautiful writer who actually has written 2 novels that take place in Eastern Europe, who is, just a gorgeous prose stylist. I'm a big fan of Maria Semple, the comedic writer whose most well-known book is Where'd You Go, Bernadette, which is, again, a very funny novel, which I really, really love. In terms of like many, Toni Morrison, I love, obviously, and Edith Wharton was my favorite writer when I was growing up and probably still is. So I love that, but I do love people who have a sense of humor about their writing. One of the people I got to edit at one point, my admirer, like many people, is Armistead Maupin, who wrote the Tales of the City series. So I loved working with him because there was a great sense of humor in that book. I'm working right now as an editor with a writer whom I think is just so talented. When it comes to, because she's a fiction writer, a writer named Megan Giddings, who again is a Midwesterner. She is based in Indiana now, but I think is going to be in Minnesota soon. And she wrote a first novel called Lakewood that was kind of played with the genre elements. A lot of people compared her to Jordan Peele, the filmmaker. But her new book coming out in August is called The Women Could Fly. And it's a kind of near dystopian novel in which the main character is biracial and bisexual. And it's about witches. It's about kind of real life witches. So I love that both aspects, both reading and editing people. Yes.
Bear with me. So you moved to New York City.
Yeah.
I'm assuming to pursue writing.
Good question. I went to college right outside New York, so that's sort of the logical thing.
Oh, yeah. And you mentioned about the internet and
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you find yourself working with authors more online now with publishing as opposed to face to face because because of the internet?
Yeah, good question. The question is if the nature of working with authors has changed more to online versus in person given the internet. Absolutely. I think, and especially COVID changed things too, where there are authors of mine I haven't met in person at all because it's happened during the past couple of years where I just can't see them in person. But yes, absolutely. And again, the internet has been somewhat of an equalizer in that sense. It's not to say that every community that's marginalized has just access now and it's all great, but there are writers who have come up through the internet whose writing has just found an audience. And that's been a wonderful thing. That's an amazing thing to watch happen, that the nature of that has happened. But the truth is not only has the author-editor or author-publisher relationship changed to being virtual, editing has changed to that. Like, for example, I began as an editor doing it on the hard copy using a pencil, on a manuscript, and now I have to do track changes in Word. So everything has evolved in that sense. But I do think, what we're all hoping is that both in a professional and personal sense, one good thing that might come out of the pandemic, even though there have been so many awful things, is the idea that there's been more opportunity for people to connect virtually and online and to do virtual events like this. We've seen on the publishing end that, we might have been able to, it was amazing to hold in-person events, and it always is amazing to hold in-person author events, but we could have, maybe 100 more people at a virtual event with somebody online than we could in person, and there was more opportunity for people to engage with that. So things are changing and evolving that way, and I think oftentimes it can be a good thing.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
So I also know that in both of the novels, there's a lot of focus on the vibrant colors and textures of clothing.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, and I know you like the word piping
Yeah.
to describe the clothes that your characters wear. I just wondered if you could comment on the notion of clothes make the man and how that sort of functions in terms of identity, both sexual and immigrant and all these sorts of things. Like what role does clothing have in that formation?
Well, the question is the role of clothing in my work and the kind of what it signifies for the characters involved. I should mention, if you were not at the beginning of this talk, he is wearing a very grandiloquent, beautiful bright blue coat. So it's maybe a question that has some personal interest. But I think it's funny because actually this latest thing I was working on, I realized I started to maybe describe people's clothing too much, like way down to the detail in a way that was too much. But again, it goes back to the food question, which is that oftentimes it tells you a great deal about that character, about what somebody's trying to accomplish. And it's worth noting, not that it's just in a superficial way, but what the way people dress often tells you how they view themselves, how they want other people to view them, how, where they, what their routines are, how fastidious they may be or not. So those things are very, very key to me. And there is this question, though, kind of in a more literal sense, there is a question when you come from an immigrant culture, how decidedly you're going to dress in that culture or between the two cultures and what you're going to do in a very practical sense. If there was a scene where I was writing where, one of the Indian women who was middle-aged and one of the who was an immigrant herself was wearing like a salwar kameez top and like jeans in the bottom, which is a thing people do, but gives you a sense of sort of like either the level of comfort or leisure or combining the two that she felt. Or, there'll often be, this is the case of a lot of Indian women I knew, which is that they actually are sometimes wearing much more, like a lot of expensive jewelry, and you don't even notice it at first, and you realize they're just in the habit of wearing it. And that is, that sort of signals a certain level of habit or a certain level of comfort, or, do they change that if they go to a place where they feel unsafe? Do they do that? Those different things that signify how the characters feel. So all of it is kind of setting the scene for things and showing kind of what people are thinking and how they want to present themselves to other people as well. Well, thank you so much. This is lovely. Thank you so much for your questions and for and coming, to those of you in person and online. Thank you for both for being here, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Again, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Sarah, for your help. The link will be to the video will be up on YouTube in a day or two. And Rakesh, thank you very much. Library, thank you for hosting us again, as always. If you do not have the flyer for the remainder of the events throughout the semester, which there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more, because I'm a crazy person, please pick up the flyer, and I look forward to your attendance either in person or virtually at future events. So thank you very much.